Welcome. I'd like to do a short video today on digital IDs. So really to mention a few practical aspects of them, but mainly I want to come at this from the angle of ethics. This channel is a combination of providing educational information, practical information about relationships, and about verbal communication. I come from a background of dispute resolution and I specialize as a couples counselor and I also trained as a family mediator. And it's really from the ethics point of view, really, that I want to speak about digital IDs today. So very recently, the Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, announced that this government and he had plans to bring in digital IDs for working in this country, and I believe the date introduced by 2029. And this is really to deal with illegal working and also migration and to make our borders more secure. There are also other aspects to it that it would make it easier for us to have some basic information on that related to various platforms on one sort of database, and that also the government would find this convenient. However, not surprisingly, for a country that has always valued independence and freedom of choice, there's been a fair amount of consternation, not only from really widespread commentators from all sort of political backgrounds, that the basic premise of this, that it would make, illegal working and migration more secure, was actually a fallacy. But also concerns about us experiencing things like data breaches, which the government has not had a very good background on, and also the very important aspect of moving the goalposts, that you start off with something very basic and then there's mission creep and it becomes something much more. And some evidence that relates to that, some commentators were reporting that within days of the Prime Minister announcing this a few weeks ago, there was already documentation circling amongst parliamentarians within Parliament that were indicating about how it'd be a good idea to use it for this and that. And some people might say, well, what's the problem? Well, what is the problem? And for me, the problem is based upon a five-letter word, a word that is an ethic, is a principle, and a foundational value in this country and to the nation, but I would also say more widely to the human race. And that word is trust. If you're going to say, reasonably, well, what's the problem? That is predicated, that's based, is implicit in that, is that we can trust those who are organizing it. And I am going to be blunt, but if I were going to be blunt, what I would say is I don't trust any government further than I can throw them. It's not just Labour, it's not Conservative. I would also have reservations about any new government coming in, like Reform, in terms of them demonstrating that they really had a very ethical approach to ethical behaviour. Because I think, while it might sound a bit of a conspiracy theory, I think if you do wide research and deep research, there is a sense that there are players in the human race that actually are working towards us all moving to a one world government. And therefore that calls into question whether we are as independent and autonomous in terms of our locally, our nationally voted for governments as it might appear. And I don't want to go into this very deeply right now, but I think if you do some deep research, look and listen to commentators who are critical thinkers, who come from basically a kind of scientific paradigm in terms of approaching whether something is true or whether it's not. I think there is plenty of evidence going back 60, 70, 100 years that there are organizations that powerful people are involved in that would actually see this idea of a sort of global technocracy as something that would fit with their view of the world and their agenda. And certainly you can, look around at some of the big players, in the world scene right now that affect us all in terms of their views and the way they behave. So Bill Gates is one of them, where you very much, if you listen or you listen to some of the speakers of the World Economic Forum in Davos in Switzerland, they give the impression that they know best and that we are basically, some people, some speakers have even spoken about the majority of us as useless eaters. So I think if you do the research, you'll find that there is some evidence, credible evidence, that governments aren't necessarily always independently acting. And I think there is some quite credible evidence that we were all exposed to and experienced in the way that our government and other governments around the world, started off in the pandemic with a pre-planned approach and then just suddenly flipped, but became extremely authoritarian in ways that ethically you couldn't justify if you really looked at their basic behavioral rules and the way that they acted. And so that brings me really to my beef, if you like, with digital IDs and the word trust. I think if you look at the pandemic and the way this government and other governments acted around the world in a very totalitarian and authoritarian way, a major example that I've done videos on as part of my back catalogue in relation to COVID and the way this government dealt with it. They were very happy to not only sit back, but actually encourage various mainstream media, including social media, to censor, shut down doctors, consultants who had the temerity to just question whether the way that we were dealing with COVID was the best thing for their patients. And they had to follow an agenda and they had no freedom, as they would previously have done, to act on their best experience, know-how, and scientific assessment as to try some other things to help their clients with COVID other than the basic, the mainstream approach. Not only were they shut down and censored on media, on social media, but they were often threatened with their livelihoods and their organizations they belonged to, so like the British Medical Association, actually threatened and in some cases followed through with censoring them and in some cases defrocking them, if you understand that term in that usage. So I don't have any trust that basically politicians and government and our government have demonstrated that they are acting in good faith in terms of ethics, and until we see any government actually demonstrate practically and realistically that they are following them, I'm not prepared to trust them. And I encourage you also to review not only what I've said, but what you might already have been aware of. Obviously, we want to think the best, even though we are aware that politicians are far from perfect. We want to think the best, because it's a safer feeling to have. If you don't think that our government are operating from caring, kind, benevolent behavior, then that's a bit of a scary thing. But I'm afraid the evidence is there in the last 5 years to show that they're not upholding the basic principles of kindness, beneficent action, love, and care that I actually insist and request from my politicians and my mainstream organizations. So I'm afraid on that basis, I can't trust what the Prime Minister is suggesting in relation to digital IDs, that I'm quite sure that there will be mission creep, and that the goalposts will be moved. If you like this video, please press the subscribe button, and also tell friends, colleagues about it if you think in some way it's interesting or in some way perhaps reflects your view and the way that you've been thinking. I'll be putting out some other videos on various subjects in the near future. Until then, thank you very much for watching.